Welcome back to Nightmare Theatre. Arthur Pembroke here. Tonight I'll be reading a Dungeons & Dragons horror story based on the in-game urban legend, The Bagman. There is a movie coming out soon, also called The Bagman, about a creature who eats children. Perhaps I'll explore that creature in another video. Grab a seat by the fire while I tell you about The Bagman. I'll never forget the first time I heard the story of The Bagman. We were sitting around the campfire after a long day's trek, our party exhausted from clearing out an old ruin we had come across. It was just supposed to be another night of rest before the journey back to the city. But that night the air felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, something just out of sight. "I've got a story," Kalen, our rogue, said as the fire crackled. "Have you heard the one about the Bagman?" I remember how the others laughed, brushing it off as another campfire tale. We'd all heard dozens of spooky stories meant to scare adventurers into keeping their wits about them. But Kalen had a way of telling it that chilled me to the bone. He leaned forward, his voice lowering as he started. "They say," he began, "the Bagman was once just like us. An adventurer, greedy, reckless, who turned his back on his party when things went bad. They were in some deep dungeon, desperate for a way out, and he abandoned them." The fire flickered, casting long shadows across Kalen's face. "The Bagman crawled into a bag of holding, thinking he could hide there until the danger passed. But what he didn't know was that the inside of those bags, it's not just some empty pocket of space, it's something else, something darker. And once he was inside, he couldn't find his way out." We all went quiet as Kalen continued, his voice barely above a whisper now. Time stopped making sense for him. Days, years, they blurred together. The magic of the bag warped him, twisted him into something inhuman, and now he's still out there, slipping out of random bags of holding, looking for his way back. Kalen's eyes darted to the bag of holding we'd hauled into camp. "Every night the Bagman searches, and if he can't find his home, he drags someone back with him." I didn't sleep well that night. I couldn't stop thinking about the story, about the idea that something might crawl out of that bag while we slept. The next morning we packed up and started our journey home. But something was off. Our cleric, Mira, hadn't returned from her watch. At first we thought she'd wandered off, maybe went to relieve herself or check the perimeter, but she was nowhere to be found. We searched the woods for hours, calling her name, but there was no trace of her. Her bedroll was undisturbed, her pack still sitting by the fire pit. It was like she had vanished into thin air. The others assumed she'd gotten lost, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That story Kalen had told, it gnawed at the back of my mind, and then I saw it, a small, battered trinket lying near Mira's bedroll. It was a locket, one none of us had ever seen before. The metal was old, tarnished, as if it had been lost for decades. I picked it up, and a chill ran down my spine. I knew it didn't belong to Mira, or anyone in our group. I didn't say anything to the others, but I couldn't shake the sense of dread that had settled over me. Something had happened to her, something more than just wandering off in the middle of the night. We didn't speak of the Bagman after that. We just assumed Mira was lost and we needed to move on. But I kept that locket hidden deep in my pack, just in case. And as the days passed, I started to notice other things, small, subtle changes. The bag of holding we carried? It felt heavier. The space inside seemed deeper than it should have been. I started catching glimpses of something shifting in the darkness when I reached inside to retrieve our supplies, like something was waiting, watching. The others thought I was paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us back from that ruin. And the more I thought about it, the more certain I became. We had brought the Bagman with us, and now he was waiting for the right moment to strike again. After Mira disappeared, we did our best to keep moving, But the unease in the group was impossible to ignore. It had been days since we last saw her, and though we pushed forward, something hung in the air, a sense of dread, growing thicker with each step. Kalen had been quiet ever since. The story he told by the campfire, once a tale to spook us, now felt like an omen. I couldn't help but think of the bag of holding. It had changed. When I reached into it, I could feel the difference. Something lurking in the void, something wrong. Our ranger, Davin, had taken over scouting ahead while Kalen stuck close to the rest of us. He tried to brush off the tension, but we all felt it. Each night, when we made camp, no one slept well. Strange noises echoed in the darkness, whispers soft but unmistakable, like someone was calling our names from just beyond the trees. The worst part? Every morning we woke up to find something off. Items went missing, small things at first, food, a canteen, a knife. But then Davin's bow was gone, replaced by something else. A trinket, like the one I found near Mira's bedroll, old, rusted, something that didn't belong. Davin didn't take it well. He was livid, accusing the rest of us of playing some sick joke, but none of us knew where the trinket had come from. Each time one of us lost something, we'd find one of those strange, tarnished objects in its place. There were 4 now. Each of us except me had found one, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it was my turn. The group was starting to fracture. The trust we'd built over countless journeys together had been chipped away, replaced by paranoia. I felt it too. I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, not just from the shadows, but from something closer, something inside the bag. One night it all came to a head. We'd set up camp near the edge of a dense forest. The fire flickered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. I sat there, clutching the locket I'd found, watching the bag of holding as if it might move on its own. Suddenly, Kalen stood up, his face pale and drawn. I need to check something, he muttered, heading towards the bag. I don't know why, but the sight of him walking towards it filled me with terror. "No!" I shouted, jumping to my feet. "Don't!" But it was too late. Kalen reached into the bag, rummaging for something, his face contorting in confusion. Then his expression changed, his eyes widening in horror. He stumbled back, his hand still inside the bag, but whatever he was feeling wasn't a weapon or gear. It was something else. "Pull me out!" Kalen screamed, his voice cracking with fear. "Get me out!" We rushed to him, grabbing onto his arm, but it was like the bag had a hold of him. Davin and I pulled with all our strength, but Kalen was being dragged forward, his arm disappearing further into the bag as he struggled and screamed. There was no way something that big could fit inside. The screams grew louder, more desperate, and then silence. Kalen was gone, sucked into the bag like he never existed. We all stood there, stunned, staring at the mouth of the bag, now completely still as if nothing had happened. I wanted to throw it into the fire, to destroy it, but fear rooted me in place. The others were just as shaken. No one said a word, but I knew what they were thinking. The Bagman had taken him, and he was coming for the rest of us. That night we didn't sleep. We couldn't. The silence felt alive, pulsing around us, waiting for us to slip, to lower our guard. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves made me jump. I could barely focus, the exhaustion eating away at my mind. As I stared into the darkness, I thought I saw something moving in the shadows. It was small at first, just a flicker of motion. But then I saw it clearly. A figure, hunched and twisted, creeping along the edge of the forest. The Bagman. His eyes gleamed in the faint firelight, black and empty like the void of the bag itself. His face was gaunt, skin stretched tight over his skull, and his long, bony fingers reached toward us, scratching at the air as if feeling for something. I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed, locked in place by the sheer terror of what I was seeing. Then, just as quickly as he appeared, he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I snapped out of my trance and turned to the others, but none of them had seen it. They were huddled together, muttering in panic about Kaelin's disappearance, but I knew the truth. The Bagman was hunting us, picking us off one by one, dragging us into whatever hellish dimension he came from. I wanted to run, to leave everything behind and get as far away as possible. But deep down I knew there was no escape. He had marked us, and he wouldn't stop until we were all taken. I kept the bag close, not out of any rational need to preserve our supplies, but because I was too afraid to let it out of my sight. I had to know where it was. I had to make sure it didn't disappear, only to reappear somewhere else, somewhere closer. The whispers in the night grew louder after that, and every morning another trinket would appear, always in the place of something we'd lost. My turn was coming. I could feel it. And when it did, I wasn't sure if I'd have the strength to resist. There were only 3 of us left. Davin was gone. He vanished during the night, just like the others. I'd been keeping watch, trying desperately to stay awake, but exhaustion finally took me. It was only for a moment, a brief, stolen second of sleep, and when I opened my eyes, he was gone. No scream, no struggle, just gone. In his place was another trinket. This one was a small, tarnished compass, its needle spinning wildly as if it had lost all sense of direction. I didn't dare touch it. The sight of it made me sick. Rania and I were the only ones left now, and neither of us said a word that morning. The air was thick with the unspoken truth. We were next. Rania sat across from me, her face pale and gaunt, eyes hollowed out from lack of sleep. I could see the fear in her, the same terror gnawing away at my own sanity. We had barely eaten in days. Neither of us dared to stray far from the fire or each other. But deep down we knew it didn't matter. The Bagman was coming for us, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. We made the mistake of staying one more night. I knew we should have left, packed up and run as far away from that cursed bag as possible, but something kept us there. Some invisible force that rooted us in place, keeping us tethered to that spot like animals in a trap. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was hope, misguided and weak, but whatever it was, it sealed our fate. That night, the whispers were louder than ever. They weren't just coming from the trees this time, they were closer. Inside the camp, circling us like vultures, low and guttural, too fast and too quiet to pinpoint. The firelight flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the ground, and I could feel eyes on me. Not just from one direction, but from all around, watching, waiting. I gripped my sword, holding it close, but it felt useless. What good was steel against something that came from the void? Against something that could slip through dimensions and pluck us from reality like toys? Rania sat stiffly by the fire, her back turned to me. She hadn't moved in hours, just staring into the flames, her shoulders tense and her hands trembling. I wanted to say something, to offer some kind of comfort, but I had nothing left to give. Then, without warning, she stood up. I can't do this anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "He's coming for me. I know it. Rania, wait." But she didn't wait. She walked over to the bag of holding, staring at it with a strange, glazed look in her eyes. I could see her hand trembling as she reached out toward it, her fingers brushing the surface of the fabric. "No!" I shouted, scrambling to my feet. "Don't touch it!" But it was too late. Rania's hand plunged into the bag, and before I could stop her, her arm disappeared into the void. She gasped, her eyes widening in terror as she tried to pull back. But something held her, something from the other side. I ran to her, grabbing her shoulders and pulling with all my strength, but the bag held fast. I could hear her bones creaking, her muscles straining as she fought against the invisible force dragging her in. Then, with a sickening snap, her arm twisted violently, yanked into the bag with a force that sent her crashing to the ground. Her screams echoed through the night, piercing and desperate, as she was pulled in inch by inch, her body contorted and broken. I kept pulling, my hands slick with sweat and blood, but it was no use. The Bagman had her, and he wasn't letting go. With one final horrifying wrench, Rania's body was sucked into the bag, her face disappearing into the darkness. The screams stopped, and the only sound left was the crackle of the dying fire. She was gone. I staggered back, staring at the bag in disbelief. How could something so small contain so much horror? How could it reach into our world, take us one by one, and leave nothing behind but madness? I wanted to run, to get as far away from that cursed thing as possible, but I knew it was futile. There was no escape, not from him. I stayed awake the rest of the night, watching the bag, waiting for the inevitable. The whispers had stopped, but the silence was worse. It was like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for the moment when the Bagman would make his final move. Morning came, but it brought no relief. The sun barely broke through the clouds, casting the forest in a cold grey light. I was alone now, truly alone. And then I felt it, the bag. It moved, not much, just a small shift, like something was stirring inside. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest, and I knew it was over. The Bagman was coming for me. I reached for my sword, gripping it tightly, though I knew it would do no good. The bag shifted again, and this time the mouth opened. Slowly, impossibly, a figure began to crawl out. At first I thought it was Rania, or maybe Kalen, but no, this was something else, something worse. It was him, the Bagman. His body was twisted, his limbs too long and too thin, his skin stretched tight over his bones like parchment. His face, God's his face. Hollow eyes stared out from deep sockets, and his mouth hung open, drooling black ichor. He was out now, fully emerged from the bag, and he moved toward me with slow, deliberate steps, his fingers twitching, reaching out. I tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The Bagman had me cornered, his eyes locked on mine, and I could feel his hunger, his need to take me back with him into the void. I screamed, swinging my sword wildly, but it passed through him like smoke. He reached out, his cold, bony fingers closing around my arm, and I felt the pull, the same pull that had taken the others. I was being dragged into the bag. I fought. I screamed. But it didn't matter. The Bagman had me. And then everything went black. I woke up gasping for air, my body drenched in cold sweat. But it wasn't air I was breathing, it was something thicker, heavier, like the very atmosphere was tainted by despair. The world around me was nothing but darkness, a suffocating black void that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. I wasn't in the forest anymore. I was inside the bag. My body felt heavy, as though I was sinking into the ground beneath me, but there was no ground. It was like standing in nothingness, no up, no down, no sense of time or space. And yet the oppressive weight of the place pressed against my chest, constricting my lungs with every breath I took. I tried to move, but it was like walking through thick, invisible mud. I looked around frantically, trying to get my bearings, but there was nothing. Just endless swirling darkness, punctuated by distant, whispering voices that seemed to come from all directions at once. "Help!" I muttered, my voice weak and hollow. But even as I said it, I knew there would be no help. I was trapped in a place that existed outside of reality, beyond the reach of anything or anyone. The Bagman had taken me, and he wasn't done. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel them crawling into my mind, seeping into my thoughts like oil. The shadows began to shift, moving closer, coalescing into vague, twisted forms that danced just beyond the edge of my vision. I wasn't alone here. I wasn't the first to be taken. The realization hit me like a hammer. The Bagman had been doing this for centuries, maybe longer, taking people, dragging them into his void, and leaving nothing but trinkets behind. A watch, a compass, a locket, each one a memento of a life lost to this place, and now I was part of his collection. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled forward, desperate to find something, anything that could lead me out of this hell. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move, each step a monumental effort. As I pushed through the darkness, I began to see things, flashes of light, glimpses of movement, shapes that took on a sickening familiarity. People. I wasn't sure if they were real at first, just flickers of light in the distance, but as I moved closer, I saw them, figures huddled in the shadows, their faces contorted in agony. They were the others, the ones the Bagman had taken. Kalen, Rania, Davin, they were here. Their bodies were twisted, their eyes vacant, and they moved with a jerky, unnatural motion, like puppets on invisible strings. I called out to them, my voice cracking with fear. "Kalen, Rania, can you hear me?" But they didn't respond. They just stood there, swaying in the dark, their hollow eyes staring past me as though I didn't exist. I wanted to run to them, to shake them, to scream at them, to snap out of it. But something stopped me, a presence, cold and malevolent. The Bagman. I could feel him before I saw him, a growing weight in the air, a chill that seeped into my bones. The shadows twisted and parted, and he emerged from the void, his body grotesque and distorted, too long, too thin, his skin stretched tight over his gaunt frame. His eyes were hollow like the others, but there was something different about him, something darker. He was a predator, and I was his prey. He moved toward me, slow and deliberate, his fingers outstretched, and I knew this was it. He was going to take me, just like he'd taken the others. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest, but there was nowhere to go. The void stretched on forever, and the Bagman was closing in. Then something strange happened. A voice echoed in my mind, a faint, broken whisper. At first I thought it was the Bagman, but it wasn't. It was Rania. "Don't let him take you," the voice said. "You can still escape. There's a way out." My eyes darted around, searching for her, but she was gone. Only the twisted, empty shell of her body remained, swaying in the darkness. A way out. There had to be. If Rania could still reach me, maybe I could fight this. Maybe I could find the exit, the way back to the real world. I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going, or if there even was an escape, but I ran anyway, pushing through the thick air, my legs burning with the effort. The Bagman's presence loomed behind me, growing stronger, closer, his whispering voice creeping into my mind, urging me to stop. But I wouldn't, I couldn't, I had to survive. The darkness began to shift, parting like a curtain, and I saw something up ahead, a flicker of light. Faint and distant, but it was there, a doorway maybe, or a portal. I didn't know, but I ran toward it with everything I had. The Bagman's whisper turned into a roar, filling my head with dark promises and nightmares. I could feel his icy fingers brushing against the back of my neck, pulling me back, dragging me down. But I reached the light. With one final, desperate lunge, I threw myself through the opening, and the world around me exploded into blinding brightness. I woke up on the ground, gasping for breath. The air was fresh, real. I could feel the earth beneath me, the warmth of the sun on my face. I was free. I sat up, my heart racing, and looked around. I was back in the forest, back where it all began. The bag of holding lay discarded on the ground, untouched, unremarkable. A simple, unassuming thing. But I knew better. I wasn't the same. None of us were. We had all been marked by the Bagman, touched by his dark world. I didn't know how long it would be before he came for me again, or if I'd truly escaped. But for now, I was alive, and I wouldn't forget. Thank you again for joining me. Let me know in the comments what stories you would like to explore with me, and be sure to like and subscribe. I'll see you all again tomorrow night.